I'm Allison Eyring, organization psychologist, CEO, and endurance athlete. I've spent the last 25 years helping companies solve the people and organizational challenges of growth. I've worked with all types of CEOs and business leaders across the world, but it takes a special kind of leader to successfully grow a business. I call them growth leaders. These leaders have an edge for growth. This allows them to drive performance today while transforming their business for tomorrow while keeping their people energized. So whether you're starting a company or reigniting a team within a large, mature company, I'll show you what it takes to successfully drive business growth through conversations with some of the best growth leaders I know. In my work with growth leaders, I see many who struggle to fundamentally pivot or strategically redirect their entire business. It's difficult to be able to perform and transform at the same time. Today, I'm going to speak with Anna Gong, CEO and founder of Perx Technologies. Perx is a Singapore-based customer engagement and loyalty platform that Anna has led since 2014. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you very much.
Anna, tell me a little bit about Perx, the platform. How does it work?
Well, we have actually redefined what loyalty is in the digital economy, and also how you engage with customers. We started out as a B2C loyalty app for the consumers, consolidating all of their different favorite merchants into one single unified app. But more and more, as the economy has shifted, the banks and telcos and all these super apps coming out with their own way of engaging customers, we felt that the need, and I actually saw this coming for 2-3 years ahead of the curve, and thinking that this is not sustainable as forcing or maybe pushing customers to actually download another lifestyle app. We're so inundated with apps fatigue, right? So we decided to push this company to a B2B space and pivot it completely. It took us about 2 years to sunset the B2C app. And then while we wind down that company, we started to build an entire enterprise-grade platform from scratch and then launched a beta version of it in 2016. And now we're serving large telcos, banks, insurers, large retail giants in this space. And we're purpose-built to solve B2B2C as well as B2C.
I want to go back to that because what you're describing, you're making it sound easy, but it's one of the things that I find that leaders struggle with so much, which is that on one hand, they're trying to deliver results. They've got to grow, they got to perform, and then they also have to be looking to the future and building capabilities. How did you do that? How did you find that balance that keep it going and also changing at the same time?
Well, initially when I found a hole or a gap in enterprise customer engagement, I was one of the customers for a telco, and I was a customer of theirs for 7 years, probably gave them about 80 to 100K in lifetime value of my services. And yet I've never been communicated proactively. And when I left, they sent me a cold email to ask me to fill out a survey to let them know why I left.
Oh, that hurts.
So, and then
you said there's pain there.
Right. So it's after the fact, right? So they don't really come to you until something negative has happened.
Right.
And then similar to banks and other services. So there's one case that was really funny. One of my ex-colleagues, he said he was a customer with one of the telcos for 20 years. And when he left them to another telco for a cheaper plan, they actually asked him, why would you leave? Why can't you've been with us for 20 years? And they gave him so many different offers to stay with the company. And he asked, so which department are you calling from? And she said, I'm from the loyalty department. And he said, I've never heard from you for 20 years.
Until I
What
leave.
loyalty? So that was the funniest thing. So this is why the model has been so broken. And it was through personal experience that I felt there's a need to help enterprises serve the customers within a business model that's already inherently sticky. And so there's a high retention model already. Why don't we help them fix engagement instead?
Now, so you're describing how you came to the conclusion that you needed to pivot the business.
Yeah.
Now, how did you survive as a business during that pivot? Because I'm sure it wasn't just crystal clear and then one day you went from one to the other. So how did you as a leader do both at the same time?
Well, you take a blank canvas and figure out who could be your beta customers. And this is the version, or 0.5 version of the platform. And you start to find product market fit from there on out. And Are you solving the right problem statements for them? Is there the right fit to create some relevance in the market? Is it a must-have versus a nice-to-have? And so there's so many different ways of slicing this, but inherently we looked at the product market fit. And once we have found that in 2016, 2017, we realized that there's a massive market that we can go after, and that's when we doubled down on it.
So did you do that with your existing employees? Says you had a group of employees that knew how to run a B2C company. Were they the same people that helped you figure out how to become a B2B business?
That's a very good question. No. It was painful because I had to let them all go. I kept maybe a couple of employees. One was an engineer and one was a graphic designer. They were from the original team. And so it was very painful to let go of everybody from the B2C space. But if you think about the large enterprises, it's filled with complexity. It's filled with deep sophistication, large budgets, and different C-level discussions. It's high touch. We're not going to a mom and pop shop, just having coffee. We're really looking at selling in a very consultative way, just like McKinsey or BCG would sell you.
Much more sophisticated purchase.
Exactly. Right. And value engineering. That's what, we're doing. And so to have those kind of conversations requires experience in the market, serving those large entities. So then we decided to recruit from scratch.
And so the team that you brought in, they came in and then solely focused on the new B2B business?
Yes.
Okay.
And even, the engineering team that we thought could build this enterprise framework and the architecture, it didn't happen that way. The first, second, third version were not as scalable and high performing. We decided to recruit a whole new engineering team. So a lot of it was really trial by fire because Singapore is not known for engineering talent, and it's very well known for research and operations and finance, and now fintech, but not really core engineering. And so deep tech does not really exist here as much as it does in other parts of the Western market. So we had to recruit those from abroad and built a team from scratch. And it took a lot of mistakes to get to where we are. We will continue to make a few mistakes here and there, but hiring was excruciatingly painful.
It's painful and it's so important, isn't it?
Right.
I love also that you talked about, you really used outside-in thinking to help guide where you went, that you really looked to who's the perfect customer. How are we going to work with them? How are we going to solve their problem? And that then drove the pivot as opposed to being more internally focused, which I think a lot of organizations start with, what do I have? How can I sell it? As opposed to the outside-in thinking that you're describing.
Right. I mean, it's easier to be consuming and living in your own world and selling a product that you think customers need. We had to go and interview and sell the idea to our enterprise customers or prospects. And the minute we found a sweet spot, the light bulb goes on, so you find the right target, persona, because we're not selling to IT anymore. And IT actually is the inhibitor of digital transformation. And sometimes they are trying to preserve their roles. So they love on-prem solutions. Oh, you're a SaaS platform. And they have no clue about how to deal with SaaS platforms, in the cloud, in the public cloud. How do you manage data, privacy and so forth, personal identifiable information. So we had to educate them from scratch, a lot of them. And so once we fine-tuned the whole approach and we had it packed down with the help of some partners as well, like Amazon Web Services, they already solved those problems. And MAS also had blessed them and approved them in working with, GovTech and other, sectors in open banking. So for the government to approve some of this, it started to trickle into the enterprise space.
Right. Talk to me a little bit about how your business is using data to solve problems for enterprises.
Well, if you think about real-time engagement, using data to make it more personalized, the one company that's done this really well, we talked about this a lot, is Apple, Amazon, and Netflix. These, FANGs, the companies, and Google is one of them. So now if you think about when you shop online, you often get predictive or recommendations of products that you might need. And so that's just the way that they approach consumer behavior. Now, if you think about banking, telco services, and other types, you can't really, because everything is on the back end. Everything's on-prem. It's actually like a mainframe. And so to move an elephant in an archaic system to have real-time engagement is much more difficult. So now all of these different companies are moving into the cloud. They've formed a separate team called a platform or digital team to only manage mobile first. And so how do we transform faster while the IT organization, the CIO, maintains the BAU, business as usual model, which keeps the lights on, while you actually go and now build new business models and do market creation and market creating revenue models.
So it sounds like not only are you selling the software solution, but you're also having to do a lot of capability building with your clients.
It's a lot of thought leadership. There's some co-creating, co-innovation happening. But if your product serves 70% or even 80% of their core capabilities or requests, then that's actually, the holy grail. And then the rest is, you're constantly co-creating, co-innovating with them, on your own roadmap as well. So your customers will drive your roadmap. And this is what the enterprise space looks like.
Right.
Coming up in the next segment.
I think most investors invest in the founder, and they believe in you first, the story that you're telling, the business model.
You're listening to Growth Leaders, a podcast with Alison Eyring.
Now, I'm really interested in your own journey because you were born in Guangzhou. You went as a child to the United States. You went to university in California. And then later you came back into Asia in this role. And now you've grown a global company from Singapore. My own company is 20 years old this year.
Yeah,
so
congrats.
2020, yeah. Yay!
You survived.
So great. And we operate in 6 continents, so I can appreciate how challenging it is to grow a global company from a little country. And I want to hear from you, what are some of the things that you've learned about growing a global company from Singapore?
Ooh, that's tough. Singapore is an absolute amazing place to headquarter your company. However, we're a tech sector. We're in the tech sector, so that has made everything more difficult. It was, the addressable market for Singapore is quite small as well. And that's why the loyalty app that we used to have, the B2C app, we ended up tapping out the market, because if you don't go abroad, then you're not going to increase your market share. And so it was very difficult to sustain the business. But from an enterprise, we were able to do a lot of you rely on your direct sales reps and your account executives. And so we hired a direct sales force to be able to connect with customers all over the globe, or even just our home turf in Southeast Asia. And if we can dominate and do Southeast Asia very well, especially because there's very low, I would say, technical debt, there's low legacy. So then the mobility, market is just leapfrogging.
Yes.
And so for us, it was much faster time to market with them. There's a greater need for mobile first. And so we went to that market segment first. So we're now in 8 countries, including Hong Kong, but we're across Southeast Asia, not just Singapore. And now companies from abroad, over in the Western markets, Africa, Europe, even Latin America, they're all coming to us.
And do you sell from here, or do you have people that are sitting in the different regions of the world that are driving those sales for you?
Because we're so inundated with opportunities, even in Asia Pacific, we've decided to slow down. And it's, being a hyper-focused startup is necessary, because you could easily get distracted. Just because there's opportunity doesn't mean that you go there. And we require the funding. I think enterprise SaaS in Asia was not a very, you don't see many of these companies being born out of Singapore. There are still, quite a number of them actually grown out of Chennai, India. But out of Singapore it wasn't the landscape. So we're probably one of the few enterprise SaaS companies really starting and headquartering here, and we're trying to make it happen and growing across. Our entire team, actually 95% of our team is here, based in Singapore.
Fantastic. Now, what advice would you give people that are thinking about starting a company that they want to be regional or global from Singapore?
There's certain elements, right? If you're in the fintech, it really depends on business model. If you're a developer solution, you can be remote and your entire organization could be remote all over the world. You don't even need to have a big investment in an office space. And it really depends, because for us, we have to build a core team with deep expertise and domain knowledge and a lot of thought leadership, just like Salesforce.com, right? They really started out in San Francisco, and then they grew the team outwards from there. And if you think about most of the solutions that inherently in Singapore is either fintech, research, and now there's a really big, I would say, startup community now, but a lot of them uses Singapore as a shell. You know, some of the startups, 90% of their staff is in India or in Vietnam, or, you know, so the operating team or the sales organization is here, and some of the management's here. And so certain skill sets are so difficult to find also in the emerging markets, like data science, data engineers, and deep tech back-end engineers with DevOps experience. And so that's not really inherent in certain emerging markets. So then you have to hire them from all over the world, bring them here. So you couple that with some Singapore local expertise, with the regional expertise, and then you hire from abroad.
Earlier you talked about the importance of focus. And I think that is such an important lesson for growth leaders, is that just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah, that's right. And I think our biggest competition right now is dealing with large enterprises, the whole mentality of build versus buy. And that's what most startups actually fight against. Not the other startup that's, sitting in Indonesia or Thailand, who are only focusing on their home turf, that are hyper localized as a services company first and not a platform. And so when you're building a SaaS platform or any SaaS solution, it should be self-serve. From the minute you buy the solution, you should be able to use it right away and the quick time to serve, versus let me build it in 12 months and then you can go live. And, we don't have time. Your users don't even have 8-second attention span.
Or patience. Absolutely.
Right?
Now, for many entrepreneurs, pitching for external funding has to be one of the most daunting tasks. Recently, you were successful in your Series B funding, and I would like you to share some of your lessons of experience about how to go and get money from external investors.
Well, I wouldn't say I succeeded. Actually, I failed. I wanted to raise $10 million. And to give us enough runway to sustain for 18 to 24 months and just, build out the roadmap. We knew there was such a big opportunity. But when I went to the VC community and the investor community, it was extremely difficult to have them understand what this business addresses, what this technology addresses. And it wasn't I don't think they understood it right away. And it took a lot to convince them. And so those who actually understood gave us the funds, obviously. So I decided, rather than going through that whole painful stage, let's just close it, because we were so in dire straits to keep the business running. So I'll just close the $5 million versus trying to go for the big $10 million.
And do you think that the issue is just that it's so complex what you're doing in terms of people understanding how it works? It's a very different business from what somebody would have invested in, say, a decade ago.
So I came from Silicon Valley, and the investors in the Valley are entrepreneur-led investors. They operated companies, they failed, they succeeded, they've been through the tough times, and it was extremely shocking and surprising to see what an elementary mindset here was in terms of deep tech, in terms of, the whole B2B space. We were growing in a B2C, every investor was chasing the B2C market, infrastructure market, and now everyone is pivoting to B2B. It's not a high burn model. It's sustainable. If you can sign 3-year contracts with large enterprises, and it's much stickier, and these large contract values, that is a really sustainable business model versus high churn, low sophistication, and you have to fund more of that churn and chase your own tail every year. So it's a different business. And now with the WeWork debacle, everyone's going through financial cleansing of their own spreadsheets, right, and their own financial P&L to figure out how do they lower that burn.
Right.
You can't race to the bottom anymore.
Right.
Especially now with COVID, it's double whammy.
So what advice do you give? So it sounds like a number of challenges of fundraising. One is just needing to attract funds from investors that may not understand or understand where you're going or how it's different from what they've done in the past. It sounds like also the investment environment, say in Silicon Valley, is more led by people who've been more startup entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
So are the people that you were pitching to not entrepreneurs?
Oh, most of them, no, not at all.
Right.
There may be family offices. They're running the family offices funds. They're consultants or financial analysts.
Right.
Or from ex-private equity consultants and whatnot, fund managers. Most of them haven't been an entrepreneur themselves, never really operated a business or failed miserably. They've been through jobs, right? But one of the things that, going through this, it's not the immaturity of the VC community per se. I think, this could be a career limiting move by saying this, but I think most investors invest in the founder and they believe in you first, the story that you're telling, the business model. That's why back then you can close a funding round on a napkin. They just believe in you and believe in that vision. And so I'm just going to fund you straight off the bat. Whether you develop and how you execute is a different story. And so I believe that was how I actually was able to raise that kind of money for Perx. And now we're going to more of a higher growth stage. We have to show a lot more sophistication, have structure and processes in place rather than having a chaotic system. But we're still going to be work in progress. But fundamentally, I think investors invest in the founder or invest in the team and the vision. And so it's really whether they understand the product or not, it maybe is the secondary thing.
So I guess that's two important things. One is about really understanding that it's you that's getting the investment right at the very beginning, but then also understanding that along the journey, the criteria change, right? What they're looking for, what they're expecting evolves. And so as a leader, you also have to be evolving and proving something different.
Exactly. Slack wasn't Slack when they got invested, right? They completely pivoted big time. I think everybody pivoted. You pivot a few times over. And I think now Perx is pivoting again. We started out as a loyalty and engagement platform, but now we're thinking, where do we fit? We're creating a brand new category that doesn't belong in the magic quadrant or some, wave or some analyst's, depicted, box. So we're trying to figure out how to be a category creating solution.
How exciting.
Yeah,
so we'll have to interview you for the next season and find out where that's going.
Right.
Coming up in the next segment.
It's not about depending on anybody. It's about, finding the right role models and mentors to really help you.
You're listening to Growth Leaders, a podcast with Alison Eyring.
I'm really interested in your own experience, that this is your 5th startup experience. You've had 20 years plus in tech. There's not so many women in tech that are founders and growing startups. What do you think are some of the ways that we can encourage and support more women entrepreneurs?
Yes, I've been part of an ecosystem in Southeast Asia trying to recruit more female entrepreneurs into our community. It's been quite tough. I think even some of the educational, fundamental I would say educational system and raising kids here is so different. And I was mentoring this one kid from one of the colleges here in Singapore. And I asked her, who's your idol? Who do you admire? And she said, what's that? And I said, what do you mean you don't know what an idol or a role model is? She said, Anna, I don't know. So I had to explain that to her. And she said, oh, we were never taught to depend on anybody. I said, no, it's not about depending on anybody. It's about, finding the right role models and mentors to really help you. And so her mindset is, I don't need anybody. I don't need to get any advice. I will count on myself and I would do it on my own. So even that fundamental thinking really surprised me. And so this is how we build it, right? And in the Western market that I was raised in now, we were taught to just, the world's your oyster, do whatever you can, build a community, network, And so right before I left Silicon Valley, I networked the hell out of that ecosystem and maintained such great relationships with a lot of key players there.
So, I guess if I follow the logic of your sharing, I might think, well, then maybe in a generation from now, we'll have more women entrepreneurs. But, 25 years ago, we said that about women in management, and we're still not moving the needle in a very significant way. Yeah. So I'm kind of curious what you think we can do that can help girls and young women be excited about going into being a startup or even doing more risky work in STEM, for instance.
Yeah, and this is where it goes back to the role modeling. They need mentors and role models in the system, in the ecosystem where it's female-led. And if they see less and less, and I saw some stats that Asia's actually going backwards, in female leadership. And how can we do this if that's the case, right? There's less of us in the boards and less of us leading companies. What's going on, right? So we really need to talk about it, and it's difficult to talk about it, but then also to advise and mentor these kids. And that's why I love actually building that whole community-based nonprofits to help these kids, give them scholarships from trying families, and just show them that the path. I got some help as well when I, applied for certain scholarships. You cannot do it yourself. I never was known to do anything on my own, but you just have to have the perseverance and commit it to the end goal. But somehow I think it just came from the DNA. Maybe it's being an immigrant, having to strive and try so hard to make it in the U.S. that kind of fundamentally shaped my DNA as this no-nonsense bitch. Sometimes I feel like...
Well, I wouldn't say that. Well, yeah. What you're describing is resilience. And in our work with growth leaders, we see that resilience is so important. And resilience is important for everyone.
Right.
But you are going to have to be able to fall and get back up. You're going to have to be able to deal with lots of hardship.
Right.
And so I think that often people who move, who are immigrants, who have different changes in their life, learn how to deal with that. Right. And so I think it's also, you never hope for hardship on anybody, but it's like the sand and the oyster, right? It's hard and it's annoying, but then it leads to this pearl.
Right.
So if I go back to your example of the student, it makes me curious if you are doing anything to create internships or to do things to give young women courage and just to see how exciting it can be to be in a startup.
Oh, absolutely. We have internships from all the different segments, from engineering to marketing to sales to operations. So anyone who wants to intern at Perx, I really deplore them to come in and apply. We also work with certain universities from the U.S. that actually have exchange programs. Notre Dame University has actually worked with us quite a few times, sending their students over because they have a big funding program for exchange programs, and we took a few of those students, and the couple of females that we had, we vividly remember how amazing they were, and they were just contributing over 6 weeks in the internship and had such an impact already. Yeah.
Now, a minute ago, we were talking about resilience, and as we're recording this, the world is coping with COVID-19, and it's changed the world. Talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of how the startup community is coping with this coronavirus.
The feelings are really raw. I think it's constantly changing and moving. We've been helping each other. So Suresh Shankar of another startup, Crayon Data, and we pulled together some founders in the ecosystem and shared some challenges because it's very lonely, even lonelier now than ever, because we're all going through a survival state right now. And it's out of our control, right? It's not about your execution. It's not about how you manage a company. It's literally, it's a global issue, not your own company, personal issue. So we pulled together a bunch of founders, and we had almost like a scramble call to ask what can we do to help each other? Talk about all the challenges that you're facing today. And we ended up getting so many tips and ideas on how to solve specific problems. Here's what I'm doing. Oh, I didn't know you're doing that. Can you help me? So there was a lot of that. But more importantly, it's the mental health. Entrepreneurship is so difficult already, and it's already created a lot of depression in founders. But now doubling with COVID, and now you have to lay off people, cutting salaries. There's so many companies managing on how to last for the foreseeable 90 days, 120 days. And the investors are saying, you need to last for the next 12 to 18 months. Sometimes that's just, I feel that if they're in our shoes, they would then understand that we're living day to day.
Right.
Right.
Well, I'm hearing some really good advice, actually, for other leaders and startup leaders as well. One is about realizing that this is a situation you cannot control, and then focusing on what you can. Mm-hmm. Reaching out to others in similar situation and offering to both help and also to receive support. Right. I think that sometimes it's very hard for us to receive help from others. Mm-hmm. And then also really to be mindful of our mind and our own mental health, right, and of that and others around us. Mm-hmm. And certainly as a CEO, it's difficult sometimes because there's not a shoulder to cry on at the office, and so it can be quite isolating. Right. So having that community around you to be able to support you is very important.
And I think it surprised us that how this difficult situation has tested leadership. And some of the founders, we learned so much from each other. The way that they manage their employees, the way that they execute it during this crisis is just top notch. You're learning from the young and older. And so it's fantastic to see the true colors come out and the characters, and you're learning from each other. And when you practice radical transparency also, not everybody actually will appreciate it or even understand what that means. Certain cultures might find like too much information. They don't care for it, or it's necessary, right? So you just have to do what's needful.
Right.
Yeah.
What would be one thing you've learned through this community? What's one practice that you think, this is something that I want to be leading this way?
It's not necessarily anything particular, but it was just communication. Taking care of your employees and make sure that they don't panic, because once you panic, they're going to start panicking. And you have to maintain a really strong persona, a front, that you're the leader, you're the general out in the battlefield saving this company, and you need them behind you. And how can you work with each other and mobilize the, war rooms, SWAT teams, task force to help each other. And when you're cutting salaries and they still are so motivated to help each other because it's all for one for all versus let me cut 50% of the staff first, right? It's different in Asia, where in the US you have welfare. In certain, Western countries you have welfare. Here in Asia, if you have even 2% or 5% or 10% unemployment, these people are on the streets. There is no welfare. And so we had to deliberate, despite we're coming from the Western market and we were groomed to think that way, we have to execute differently. Mm. We have to care about our employees and their families differently.
And I think that compassion is a characteristic of a great leader.
Right.
Thank you so much, Anna. I appreciate you talking with me today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to Growth Leaders wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a comment and a rating. We'd love to hear what you think. If you have questions about growth or growth leadership, please email us at growthleaders@organizationsolutions.com. Growth Leaders is produced by Organization Solutions in partnership with MediaCorp. Many thanks to Dee Kirk, Sean Young, Barry Toe, Keith Tan, Zach Rasley, and Susan Eyring.